Okay, thank you for coming today. After doing the training and then looking at the applications, I just realized that there's a lot of confusion, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that our past 4 years of funding, because of COVID, because of staff changes, because of FTA stuff, there was just a lot of confusion with the timelines and the period of performance, end dates, and all of that. So I wanted to provide a lunch and learn just so I can go over it again and try to provide some visuals of what those timelines look like so that we can help get back on track with our spending. So I'm going to go through that and show you guys timeline visuals and try to explain it the best I can. Then at the end, we'll have time for you to ask any other application questions or questions about the budget, the milestones, the timeline, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to go over first the federal fiscal year 2023 and what that looks like visually. And hopefully this helps, and you can even maybe print off the visuals so you have them. And then we'll go over federal fiscal year 2024. We'll talk more about the understanding of operating assistance and mobility management. What do those mean? And then aligning your milestones for operating with your operating budget, which was something I saw a lot in the applications, is that people weren't sure what milestones to put. So I'll show you examples of that. And then I'm going to talk again about what period of performance means when we're talking about operating and mobility management funds. Then I'm going to talk about the difference in the timeline and project period of performance when it comes to capital projects versus what we're talking about, like operating, mobility management, those reimbursement funds. Yeah, and then we'll talk about budget and invoices, and then we can open it for questions. So this is a visual view of what a federal fiscal year looks like, in particular 2023 for operating funds. So the federal fiscal year starts October 2022 for the federal fiscal year of 2023. So the FTA runs October to September. That to them is a federal fiscal year. That is why when we do our operating awards, we tell you you can backdate your expenses to October 1st of that federal fiscal year. So, well, we'll get to that. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So then here are a look at what those are in quarters. Okay, to help you visualize that. And then we'll look at 2024, and then I'll talk more in depth. So that's what 2023 federal fiscal year is. 2024 federal fiscal year is October 1st, 2023 to the end of September, so September 30th, 2024. Then you have first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. So the reason I'm showing you this, right, is because this is how the FTA views the funds and the federal fiscal year. So they're providing 2023 operating funds for federal fiscal year 2023. That means that is the year where you have to incur the costs of those funds. By incur, I mean you spent money on operating your transportation program, on allowable operation stuff, driver salary, fuel, things like that, things that are allowable operating costs. This is the timeline that you incurred those costs, you saved the receipts, and you're ready to submit those for reimbursement, okay? So let's move forward a little bit. So that's 2024. Now, just to clear up some things, and then we'll get back to some more visuals of the timeline so I can get more in depth about it. But operating expenses are the costs needed to keep a public transportation system or private running smoothly. This includes paying drivers, buying fuel, things like that. Operating can be backdated, like I said, to the start of the federal fiscal year, which is October 1st. So we'll go back and look at the timelines again. If you're applying for 2023 operating funds, you should already have all your incurred costs and all your receipts ready to be submitted as soon as you sign your grant agreement. And that is where I'm getting a lot of confusion. So we will also look at those past grants and how they kind of bled into our current year and why people are confused. And I'll try to clarify that more. As a reminder, operations are reimbursed at 50%, and this is a reimbursement-based project, meaning you should have the funds already to run the project and cover costs. And then you're asking for reimbursement to help you with those already expended costs of operating your program. So regardless of how operating was funded in the past, I know we've had COVID funds, emergency relief funds, we've had 100% operating funds, a lot of different out of the box things that didn't really follow or stay true to the program. And we're trying to get back on track with the FTA for spending these funds properly. So regardless of how operating was funded in the past, we will not fund transportation programs that don't exist. Because if you're asking for funding to help you with operating assistance, but you're not currently running a transportation program, you can't have incurred those costs and be ready to ask for reimbursement. Does that make sense? So if you don't have a fleet yet and you don't have 5310 vehicles and you're asking for vehicles in this grant, you can't also ask for operating assistance because you don't have that vehicle yet. You're not running the transportation program and you don't have drivers yet. Does that make sense? So if you're getting a vehicle for the first time in this grant, the FY 2023-2024 grant year, then you shouldn't be asking for operating yet. You would be asking in the next application cycle once you have your vehicle, you've put it into service, you've hired a driver, you start accruing those expenses, okay? Emergency relief funding, agencies closing down, many other factors resulted in agencies being behind on spending, which led us to extending those past grants, federal fiscal 2021 and 2022. We extended that period end date. And that's why a lot of people are confused because they're going, well, I had operations in that grant year that I'm still spending. So we'll talk more about that. If you're still spending those operating funds on costs you incurred in federal fiscal year 2023 or 2024, then you shouldn't be asking for more operating for 2023 and 2024 because you already have it in that past grant. Okay. I'll show that visually so you can better understand it because the FTA is pushing us to get back on track with our spending timelines. Because again, with all the stuff that happens in the COVID ages, like we got a little bit off of our milestones and our period of performance dates with the FTA. Okay. So understanding mobility management of it. I just wanted to redefine mobility management because it's a little confusing because we do kind of treat it like operating reimbursement, but it is considered a capital project. So I don't want you to get confused when I'm talking about capital projects like vehicles. I don't want you thinking that I'm meaning mobility management. So mobility management is treated more like operating assistance. It's covered at 80%, but you're still collecting all of your receipts. You're saving all those incurred costs. You're asking for reimbursement. You're not going out and purchasing something. Okay, so there's different federal rules about that. Mobility management is about making short-term plans and projects to help different transportation services work better together. It's done through coordination with different groups. There are specific laws about governments and mobility management. It doesn't involve actually running any transportation services. So a lot of people are still confusing mobility management and fleet management. A mobility manager is not a fleet manager. Mobility manager does more regional coordination of different transportation programs. Okay, so they're not a fleet manager. I just wanted to clear that up. If you're asking for fleet manager salary, that is operating expenses, and that's 50%, not 80%. Okay. Mobility management is a unique project. And we typically have a mobility manager in each region or UZA that works with all the transportation agencies in that region, okay? So it's not like your agency's fleet manager. So it is considered capital because we reimburse it at 80%, but we treat it more like operating, where you submit an invoice or reimbursement, you have to have backup documents, and you have to incur those costs and track them similar to how you track and record operating expenses. So also with mobility management, you can backdate your receipts for activities to the beginning of the federal fiscal year, October 1st. You must have a mobility manager already hired to apply for funds, because then you won't spend them on time. So if you're like, I don't have a mobility manager right now, but I want funds to pay them, that doesn't work, because you already need to have incurred those costs. Oh no, I don't want to update my computer. Okay, sorry. You can't have incurred the costs in 2023 if you don't have a mobility manager yet. Okay, does that make sense? So this is still a reimbursement-based project. The FTA wants to reimburse you for those projects that your agency is providing or doing to help you run these services. If you have more questions about that, we can talk about that later. But I want to focus a little bit more on operating. So let's talk about aligning your operating milestones with your budget. So again, this is what the federal fiscal year looks like. Hopefully I'm not missing any months. Okay, I think it looks right. So October 1st, 2022 is when you start incurring your expenses, which also means spending your money on your transportation project, saving your receipts, getting ready so that when you sign a grant agreement award, right, you're ready to submit those. September 30th, 2023, all your expenses for the year or incurred costs are complete. You've collected your receipts and you're ready to submit invoices for 2023 as soon as you sign your grant agreement. Then federal fiscal 2024, because remember, our grants are 2 years lumped into one, right? So we do a 2-year grant cycle. So we have 2023, 2024. So federal fiscal year 2024, your milestone for operating would be you start incurring your expenses October 1st, 2023, which means spending your money on your transportation project, saving your receipts, collecting your data. Sometime in 2024, you sign your grant agreement for your operating award. Let's pretend if you were awarded operating funds, right, in this grant cycle. And then once you sign that grant agreement, you can go ahead and submit all 4 of your quarterly invoices for 2023 for reimbursement. And then you can start submitting your invoices for 2024. And then by September 30th, 2024, all of those expenses have been incurred, right? Your receipts have been collected. And then you have, and I'll show another visual for this, but you have until June 2025 to finish submitting all the invoices for both years and completing your project. So I'm going to jump to this visual to show you that period from September 2024 to June 2025, where that arrow is. So we're just zooming in, right? This is your closing your project. I call it a buffer period. I made that up. It's not a federal term. So I give you 9 more months as kind of a buffer period, just to make sure you finish any of your milestones. Maybe you're getting your vehicles into service, or you're getting any final expenses and reports in order, or maybe you don't have a vehicle yet, that's fine, but you're finishing invoicing us for your operations, all of that stuff. So I do give you this buffer period to make sure and give you more time to make sure you're finishing your projects, okay? So again, September 30th, all your expenses for 2024 and 2023 were incurred, receipts been collected. And then by June 2025, all your invoices for both years have been submitted for payment. We've paid you. You're ready to do your closeout report. Okay. Oh wait, I forgot something. But by federal law, we have to give you, so this is going to be your period and performance date, which is a milestone that we have, and it's on your grant agreement. But we give you, by federal law, we have to give you 90 days past that date to finish sending us any closeout reports or anything that may have been missing. That's a new thing that they added, I think, during COVID, just so that we can't close the grant really fast. So like, I don't really know why they added the 90 days, because I already put in 9 months, but they add the 90 days just so that we can't close it right away. We have to wait in case you have any other final closeout reports to send us. Then we can close the grant with FTA and deobligate any unspent operating funds. Okay. Okay. Period of performance. Period of performance is the timeline when you're supposed to finish the things you promised to do with the grant money. So incurring the costs on the expenses of operating your transportation program, if we're talking about operating assistance. These dates will be in your grant agreement, and we're going to try to make them even clearer this time and separate capital from operating. That's my plan for this grant cycle. And Tracy even said maybe telling people to print off, like making one sheet where I have all your dates in your grant agreement, so you can print that paper off and like tape it to your wall. You know, something that will help you remember what those dates are. So here's another visual. If the arrow visual wasn't helpful, I tried to do this one so I can explain how they kind of overlapped and why people are confused. So if you see here, FFY 2021 and 2022 were extended clear to June 2025. That was due to a number of things. Agencies closing down and not being able to incur expenses of operating a transportation program. FTA getting new people and taking a long time to approve our awards, so we couldn't order vehicles. There were a lot of factors that went into why we had to extend it so far. Because we extended it, people did get confused about the period of performance for operating. And some people are still spending those operating funds on current activities, and we have not enforced a hard end date with that because of closing agencies and all of the things, you know. So if you still have funds there that you're still spending for activities in 2023, you probably don't need to request operations in 2023, you know. So that's why a lot of people are confused. So I wanted to show it visually so you understand what we're talking about when I'm saying that some people's budgets are overlapping. Okay. So we're trying to get back on track. So you'll see, so up top, this line up here where it has the different dates. I tried to do it by quarter. So there's 4 quarters in each one. And then this is showing, you know, the period of incurring your expenses, the buffer period that I mentioned, and then the end date when you need to close that grant or finish invoicing. So then you'll see 2025 and 2026 will be back on track, and it will just continue that way from there. Okay. I hope that is helpful and makes sense. Oh, and I put a star here because so this is the period of performance in the darker colors, specifically in regard to operations and mobility management only, because sometimes vehicle period of performance may require an extension based on supply chain issues. And that's what was happening a lot in the past with 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, right? We had so many issues getting vehicles that we had to keep pushing our period and performance date. But that is just for capital. So we're going to try to make it more clear this time on your grant agreements and separate operating from capital. Okay. So if we have to extend the period and performance date for capital, that shouldn't affect when you are incurring costs for operating, right? So let's talk about capital projects for a minute so I can explain it again.
Question about applying for operating funds. Do you want to address it at the end or now?
Yeah, let's wait till the end and we can just do everyone's questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Capital projects run on a different timeline than operating. We cannot order vehicles until after the grant agreement is signed. So that's the difference, right? You can be incurring the costs for your operating and saving those receipts and getting ready, but we cannot order vehicles until FTA has approved the award and you've signed your grant agreement. So sometimes we have to extend that end date for vehicles so that we have enough time to get them ordered and get them to you and you can get them in service. But that does not affect operating costs and those federal fiscal year and period of performance dates. Okay. Vehicles can take 1 to 2 years to be constructed and delivered if we cannot buy them directly off the lot. But just so you know, we are working on those timelines. Lewis Bus is now a state approved vendor, which means we don't have to do a whole request for bid every time we need to order vehicles. That's going to shorten our wait time a lot. So we are hoping that moving forward in the future, it's going to be easier. We're going to get vehicles faster and we're going to be able to stick to the FTA's timelines better because that's what they want to see from us. They want to see it back on track with our milestone dates. So I just wanted to let you know about that. So again, if a grant period of performance is extended because of vehicle delivery times, it does not change the period of performance on operating assistance. And then looking at the budget one more time. I know I showed you this in the application training, but I still see some confusion because I think what people are doing is estimating what their projected project's going to cost in 2025. And that's not what this grant is for. This grant is for 2023 and 2024. So your 2023 operating costs should have already been incurred. You should know what they cost you, and you should be able to put them on this form. And then you can use those numbers to estimate what 2024 will look like. So if you're estimating if 2025 and 2026, that's for the next application cycle, not this application cycle. Okay. And then one more thing before we get to questions. If you're new to operations, this might not make sense to you, so don't worry about it because we will talk more in depth about it for your post-award training. Excuse me. But you can send in your invoices for 2023 as soon as you sign your grant agreement, right? So here's an example of what that would look like. If you're familiar with how we do the invoice numbers, I used UTA as an example and put the end of the quarter because that's how we, label them in Zoom grants. So you can see in FFY 2023, I would have 4 invoices, 1 for each quarter. And as soon as I sign my grant agreement, I can go ahead and submit those in Zoom grants for reimbursement. And then in 2024, I would also have 4 quarters of invoices, okay? So that's what they would look like. I would have a total of 8 invoices for the entire grant, 1 for each quarter. Now, I know some people like First Up House, you do it by month. That's fine because they have a lot of paperwork and they can't upload that many documents. So they have like 24 total invoices instead of 8. That's a little trickier. It takes more processing on our end. It's just a lot more work for Jared and our accounting team. So we do prefer that you submit your invoices by quarter. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get to some questions. Krista, do you want to start with the questions that were in?
Sure. The first question was, is the period of performance for fiscal year 2022 the same for capital projects, for example, lift maintenance or preventive maintenance?
Okay, say that one more time.
Sorry.
Because you said federal fiscal year 2022.
2022, the same for capital projects as operations. And that may have been answered when you pulled up the graph showing the overlap. I'm not sure.
Okay.
John,
yeah,
did that question get answered for you?
So yes. So 2022, the end date is 6/30/25. Excuse me, 25. Because we had to extend it for capital. And operating because people are still spending operating funds, but we want to avoid that in the future. Does that make sense?
Yes. John, does that answer your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. My microphone was having some issues. Yeah, that was one of the questions I have because in our grant agreement, it's actually saying that the project period is through September 30th of 2025.
Yes, and that is the 90-day. I should have put June because it's confusing people. That's with the 90-day federal law, federal rule. So if you haven't like finished submitting your closeout report, right, we have to give you 90 days. But you should have gotten all your capital. You can't procure anything past 6/30. Does that make sense?
So, like, let's say we're doing preventive maintenance. So we can do preventive maintenance on like 6/29 and be able to count that in this grant.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But
And
you
then
have
we
to get
have
your invoices
until-
in before 9/30.
Yeah.
And we have to
Okay.
pay you before 9/30. So that's pushing it, but we can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
next question is, if we did spend money from fiscal year 2022 clear through fiscal year 2023, can we apply for operating funds just for fiscal year 24?
Yes. I would just tell you to put it clear on that budget form. So let's go back to that. So you would fill out year 2, right? And then on your budget in Zoom grants, I would put in like parentheses, operations 2022. Just so we know, okay, that's just for 2022. They're not splitting it amongst 2 years. Does that make sense? Sorry, I said 20. I meant 2024. Okay, that was confusing. Let me try again. You would just put operations 2024 in parentheses on the line in Zoom grants. So I was gonna do an example of Zoom grants, but I ran out of time. Let me open it. My computer's running slow because it wants me to do an update. Let me open Zoom grants here.
Sorry, real quick. So you're saying in the budget form, we need to write that it's just for fiscal year 2024?
You would just fill out year 2 column.
Just fill out the year
Yes.
2 column.
Yes, and then you would put in your Zoom grants budget. I'll show it. I'll show you on the screen. Come on.
And this is if funds were spent 22, 23 already. Am I understanding that?
If so, the question was if I used my 2022 funds on activities that I did in 2023, and then I finished spending those funds in 2023 federal fiscal year, can I just apply for federal fiscal year 2024 operating funds? And yes, you can. That's
That
fine.
happens
You don't-
because of the extensions on the 22.
Yeah,
cycle,
some
right?
people had kind of pushed their activities into 2023. Yeah. So I'm saying here in your funding uses expenses, you would put on a line like operating and then in parentheses 2024. So we know. I think you should do that anyway. You should split up. If you're asking for 2 years, you don't have to. We can do it later when we adjust your budget to match your award. But that just makes it simpler so we know which pot you're asking for, federal fiscal year 23 or 24. Okay.
So just to clarify, if we had written the grant saying we're asking for training and conference in both years, but we didn't actually spend the funds in 2020 fiscal year 2023, that we just need to move everything to fiscal year 2024 because we have to have receipts dated fiscal year 2023 for reimbursement.
Correct. So if you're asking for travel costs that haven't happened yet, when are they going to happen? In 2024 or 2025?
Well, it'll be for Ersta in 2024.
Yeah. So then, yeah, I would work that as an estimate into your 2024 budget.
And remove
And then-
it from 2023.
Yeah. Yes.
But if it's a capital, like the preventive maintenance or a third-party contract, it's okay to put things in 2023 that didn't happen yet because we haven't gotten our third-party contract signed. Or do we just need to move everything?
Third party contract. Well, again, the activities couldn't go beyond 2024 until like, so if you're planning, oh, we're going to sign a third party contract, but we haven't yet, and we might sign it in 2024, but we aren't going to have any incurred activities until 2025, then I would say get your contract signed and start incurring costs and then apply in 2025 for reimbursement of those contracted activities.
Okay, so a big chunk of what we just put in our application that isn't fundable. So we have to completely rewrite what we've done.
Yeah, understanding that the fiscal years are different than we thought. So, but if we intend to begin a contract for services within a couple of months, then it would be relevant for 2024, and we would include those expenses there, and then plan forward for 2025, recognizing that the dates will again be delayed, correct? So we'll go ahead and plan for those, and then plan for reimbursement with receipts when the next
Yes.
cycle opens. Okay.
And that's another thing that I think wasn't explained clearly in the past, is that this is a reimbursement-based program. You have to have incurred the expenses. And, you know, a lot of times we see projects that aren't in place yet. You know what I mean? And that caused a lot of problems for us in the past, giving an award for a project that didn't exist. And then we ended up not being able to spend the funds on time and had to deobligate them and give them back to the federal government. And FTA does not want us doing that. So we're trying to be better stewards about using the funds how FTA intended them to be used, which is assisting already active programs. And yeah, that's the same for third-party contractor. Preventive maintenance is a little different if you don't already have a fleet, right? I probably wouldn't request preventive maintenance if I didn't already have a fleet. If I was requesting a vehicle but didn't have a fleet yet, I feel like you would risk not spending that on time. So if you already have a fleet in
Existing
place,
vehicles, it's just if we had it tied to the
Yeah.
vehicles we were gonna get. But if we already have the
Yeah.
vehicles, okay.
And so if we are, how this applies to expansion vehicles is that it's, those operating funds are used on existing fleet vehicles. And so it's okay.
Yeah.
If we have-
yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
Next.
that helps me a lot with the clarity, understanding that it is a recapture rather than a moving forward. That's very helpful. So thanks.
Good. I'm glad,
okay, next question.
because it's really hard to show it visually. Okay, go ahead.
How will this affect quarterly performance reports? For example, when we start to do reports, will it be quarters in fiscal year 25 that we're reporting on, even though our invoices go back to fiscal year 23?
No, not necessarily. So for operating, as soon as your operating is spent, you do your final quarterly report and it has a question like, well, no, that's in your invoice. It asks, is this your last invoice? And you click yes. And then that quarterly report that your last invoice was in is going to be your last report. And you say, all of my operations are expended. This project is finished. And then we can turn off the rest of your quarterly reports. Now that's kind of different if you're managing a fleet, right? Or if you're getting, not managing a fleet, if you're getting vehicles in that year, you don't have to keep reporting about your operations if you spent them all, but you still need to keep reporting like on what's going on with the vehicle. Like, oh, I'm still waiting for my vehicle, or, oh, I got my vehicle and, we served this many people. For the vehicle, you have to report until we close the grant or 2 years, whichever comes first. If we close the grant before you've had the vehicle for 2 years, we're not going to make you keep doing quarterly reports for a grant that's not open. So it kind of depends on when you get your vehicle. But for operating, as soon as your operations are spent out in that grant, and I try to put a box around each grant, like application year, because right, it's 2 years in one. So I'm talking about your quarterly reporting on that whole grant, that whole box. As soon as your operations are expended, you don't have to keep doing quarterly reports.
Next question. Is the fleet manager reimbursed at the capital match levels of 80 to 20?
No, that would be an operations project, 50-50.
Okay, Alyssa, it looks like you have your hand raised. Did you have a question?
I do still have my hand raised, and one of them was answered, but I have another
okay.
question. I'm not sure it's the right timing for it though. So let me know if it's not, but so then that same general idea of reporting on what has been done in 2023 and then what will be done moving forward in 2024, just kind of verifying that it's existing and moving forward other than something new like a contract for services. Then in questions 14, 15, and 16, is that important to speak to how the gaps were filled and plan to continue to, rather than just recognizing that half of that strategy gaps and those things have already happened, right? Is that accurate or is that different?
And you're talking about the in the application questions 14, 15, 16?
Yes, where it asks you to address the gaps that you'll fill, the strategies, and the prioritized projects.
You can speak to both. You can speak to gaps you have filled. Well, gaps that will be filled by getting the operating funds, right? So it could be an activity you already did,
Yeah.
but the operating is going to help you. It's the
Yeah,
same
why
activity.
those are
I wouldn't
needed.
worry about changing the activity if you're still doing those things, you know? So
It's ongoing.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
just
if
kinda
I'm asking for
verifying.
operating reimbursement for services, I'm still fulfilling the same gaps for those.
Yes,
I think it would be the same.
okay. And
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
addressing those per UZA, I know this is slightly off topic, but addressing those per
Yes.
UZA seems redundant, but that's important to
It's very
outline.
important because so not all agencies request funding for each UZA, and we have to keep those separate.
Okay,
So
so even if it's redundant and verbatim redundant, that's still good.
you don't have to do it for
important
each question, just the budget.
Okay.
So you don't have to like separate for every single question. That's okay. You don't have to do that. Just when it comes to the budget, you know, be
That's
clear about this is how much I'm asking for in this UZA. This is how much I'm asking for in this UZA. Like separate them,
Okay.
because they come from different pots of money, you know.
Okay, so as far as the gaps, prioritized projects, those kinds of things,
Yeah.
it doesn't need to outline it for each. Okay, thank you.
I mean, the gaps and strategies are different in each UZA plan.
And
But if you look
ask,
and they
yeah.
have some of the same ones, then that's okay.
Mhm.
But if you're doing very different projects or they're aligning with strategies that aren't in all of the plans, then you might want
Then-
to separate it.
Okay, all right.
Like,
There's a
let me think of
couple
an
that
example. Like if I'm doing a travel, this would be a UTA project. But if I was sending my travel trainers from UTA out to Provo, Orem only, then I would put like Provo Orem travel training strategy, you know, and explain that. But if I'm not doing that project in all three, or if travel training is not a strategy or a project listed in the plan in all three of those UZAs, then I would separate.
Okay,
But if it's redundant and it's the same in each one, then that's fine.
don't do that. Okay, all righty.
Okay, Austin Davis, looks like you have your hand raised next.
Yeah, I think I've got just a bunch of questions here that maybe build on
Okay.
each other. So my apologies, first of all. So just to clarify, FY23 budget, the budget should, although the period of performance or kind of that buffer period goes all the way to June of 24, our expenses really need to be up to September of 23, which is the end of FY23.
Yes.
Can that budget have any expenses for that buffer period from like September 23 to January 24?
If you're leaking over and you haven't spent your funds, that's kind of why I work a buffer period in, just in case. So if you come to September 2024 and you're like, oh no, I still have like $2,000 left, you can go ahead and finish spending or finish incurring those costs. But I want you to shoot for September 2024, right? To keep it in a year. But that's kind of why I work this time in at the end, just in case, because I don't want you to be like, oh, I didn't spend it in time. And I'm like, well, too late. I have to give that back to the federal government. They don't want it back. So we're trying to give you enough time to say, oh no, I need 3 more months to spend that. Okay, go ahead, get your invoices in before June and you'll be good.
Okay, but like budgeting, probably shouldn't be budgeting like a full month
Right.
for all that buffer period.
Right.
Okay, and then sorry, were you gonna say something? Okay.
No, you're
Okay, and
fine.
then I think maybe we're the only ones in this circumstance, but our last grant we were able to kind of carry forward. I think our 22 funds carried us into like December of 23 years. Yeah, 23. Sorry, the years it's really hard to keep track of. But
Yeah.
are you, so we're equate to us probably not having to really ask much for 23, but then a kind of a whole year of operations for 24 on our 24 ask.
Oops, that's supposed to say 23. Sorry, I noticed that my dates are wrong on November and December. That's confusing. Sorry.
Do you want me to start that over?
No, I think oh, here we go. This is correct. I think I get what you're asking. So you kind of bled over into 2023 to December. I would budget then January 24 to September 24.
And that would be in our 24 budget.
Yes.
And then therefore we probably wouldn't have anything in our 23 budget.
Right, because you already asked for operation reimbursement for those costs.
Is that going to leave you guys underspent on all this money that you've got? And does that carry over? Or how does that, do you have any thoughts on that?
FTA doesn't, no, we're not doing carryover anymore because, yeah, FTA wants us to stick to our timelines. So it depends. I mean, if we don't get enough operating requests, that's okay because FTA prefers that we use the money on capital. So we can, what we do is we try to award capital first and then usually operating second, depending a little bit on application scores, right? And what people think, what they say in their scalability section is what's most important to them. So we take that into consideration. But if we have enough ask for the whole pot of money, it's okay if operations is reduced as long as capital is 55% or more of the total amount that we're given.
Okay, great. And then, I mean, it's kind of like the timeline overall is like that we probably want to have grant agreements signed until the end of the really the contract spend period, right? I mean, we probably won't see contracts for 23, 24 until the end of that, right?
So it kind of depends on FTA. They do have new people, but I feel like they've been getting it quicker. So as soon as I make awards, which we usually send out the award letters, I would say June 24. As soon as we get those out, I'm sending it to the FTA. So, because I don't want to wait too long because they're taking a while to like review. So I want to get that into them as quickly as possible. As soon as they accept, we'll send out grant agreements. So I'm hoping to have, it's hard because I don't know how long they're going to take, but hopefully not longer than 2 months. I don't see why it would take them longer than 2 months. If it does, I'm going to be calling them every day. Like, I need you to approve my grant. So I would like to have grant agreements signed in the fall. And then we can get, our goal is usually to get vehicles ordered before the end of the year, because then we usually get them fulfilled quicker if we're not, like, vehicle vendors tell us if we get in line before the next January 1st of the year orders, we can usually get vehicles quicker. With Lewis Bus now being a state approved contractor, we're hoping to get vehicles a lot faster. But again, if we don't have vehicles by June 2025, we can tell FTA that we need to extend that so that we can get vehicles, but it doesn't change that you need to have your operations spent before then. So it doesn't change your operations timeline, but if we need to push it because we don't have vehicles yet, we can work with FTA to do that.
Okay, great. And then on this next grant cycle, the 24 or no, 25-26 cycle, right?
Mhm.
Will that be, is that right around the corner, or is that also gonna come like at the end of the period?
Let's look at that one. Okay, so what do you mean right around the corner?
Well, because the federal fiscal year 2025 starts in like 6 months.
Yep.
Right.
So it's the same. So you'll apply for your grant in 2026, but you will backdate your receipts for operations to October 1st, 2024. Or you can, right?
Okay. All right.
Because
So
that's the start of that federal fiscal year.
well, that's really helpful to know that. I mean, normally with cost reimbursement grants, contracting for us like comes ahead, and then we.
Mhm.
So this is just, it's actually super, super helpful that you guys are doing all this and getting this organized. I mean, because I think at least for us, or for me personally, I've been totally confused for years on the flow of this. So it's great to kind of understand how this is all working and kind of what to expect in timeline. So that's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you for that feedback. I'm glad I'm clearing it up.
Okay. Alka, you've got a couple of people asking if there's a possibility to extend the deadline to make these corrections. Because with it being today, that seems like it's a really short
Yeah.
time turnaround for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Should I do, let me look here. I would like to start reading the applications next week. So could I do it by like Sunday midnight? Would that work for people? If I closed it the 24th at midnight so that the 25th I could start reviewing? Or is that still too short, you think?
I think that would work.
Yeah.
If by any chance we could have midnight Monday, that would be awesome. But I understand your time crunch too.
Let me look at the calendar really quick and just make sure.
I'm saying we just have to get our head wrapped around the fact that we're gonna spend money and have to wait over a year to get reimbursed for it. But we need to start thinking in
Yes,
those
and I know
terms.
that's hard for agencies because in the past, they've just kind of billed whenever an FTA was like, no, we don't want you doing that. So,
It kind of shifts our ability to maybe match on some things if we're also floating the cash flow, the cash
Yeah.
through the time frame. Maybe.
yeah, that's a good point.
Does kind of simplify some parts of our grant.
I'm gonna say, but once you get in
Yeah.
the cycle and you get up and running, then the reimbursement that you do finally get will help you with the match for the current portion.
Right. I think it's just going to be this transition process.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really, the way you've described it is really helpful. That clarifies it.
The
So
first
much.
year is the most painful that we're having to.
Yeah, I think-
follow the
I
guidance.
know, I think this application year, I just knew it was going to be tricky because we're trying to get back on track, especially with the FTA. Like they're pretty, we had, because of the amended year, we had 6 grants in that year. And then plus 6 grants in 21, 22, and then some other old ones that still weren't closed. So they were pretty mad at us because we had like 15 grants open and that's a lot. We should really only have like 3 to 6 open at a time. So we're trying to get back on track
We need to
for
help
then.
getting clients so they'll continue to give money that we could ask for.
Yes. And also because now that they're taking into consideration new census data, we're getting more money, which means more federal reports that UTA has to do and greater oversight from FTA. So once you pass a certain threshold of funds, then they suddenly care a lot more about how you're handling that, So in trying to be good pass through stewards, now that census data is pushing us kind of into this higher money tier, it's more important that we stick to the, rules, I guess, a little bit more.
Okay, we have people
Um,
asking if you'll email the slides as well.
Yes, yes, and it recorded. It might take me a while because I have to download the video and get it into YouTube to be able to share it. So that might take me a bit, but I can send out the slides. Does load interest count? No, I don't think that's an allowable. I can send you the link to the cost, what is it called? 2 CFR 200 cost allowables or whatever it's called, which goes over everything that's allowed. Are the changes just in the budget?
Sandra had asked earlier if we're making changes to the questions as well. Wouldn't it just be whatever the email they received?
Yeah, whatever you need to change. Yeah, but if Jared sent, I think every applicant got a email from Jared with suggested changes. So I'll extend that to, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't finish. I can extend it to Monday at midnight. Let me think.
Thank you.
FTA training. When do we have to have them done? April 4th. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I can extend that to Monday at midnight. Let me write that down so I don't forget.
Good.
Okay, John, did you have a question? I saw your hand raised, but it looks like it's gone now.
I was just going to mention that I just wanted confirmation on the date that it's going to be due. Thank you. I get to sleep tonight. And the federal fiscal year is what we've spent. The second one is what we want to spend. That helps a lot.
Okay. Good.
You say vehicles. Is the one
Yes, I'll send out an email just to summarize what we discussed, and after I move the deadline, I'll let you know.
And that vehicles are the one exception where we still put vehicles that we want in fiscal year 2023 because you have to do the ordering and all that stuff.
Yes. And hopefully in the next, 2 grant cycles, we will really tighten. The vehicle wait times are getting shorter and shorter as, we catch up on supply chain issues and all that stuff.
Yeah, we hope that the price will go down a little bit.
So one more question, Alika.
Hopefully. Yes.
That means we will start the grant application process for 25-26 the year after next.
So it would be this time, 2026. So again, our NOFA would go out here in December of 2025. And then applications due in March 2026. Does that help? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Well, I will try to upload this recording. I will send out these slides. Thank you, everyone who could attend today. I know it was short notice, but and I'm thinking maybe in the future I could do lunch and learns as like a quarterly or monthly thing. I think that could be helpful for some recipients. So I'll look into that in the future and let you know.
And thank you for extending the.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.